Sometimes I'm a little too nice to my friends. As long as it's not terribly out of my way, I tend to do some pretty ridiculous favors for them. Most of the time, it's just drunk friends looking for a ride home, so I don't mind. One night, I woke up around 1:30 in the morning to a very, very drunk call from my friend Claire, begging me to come pick her up and give her a ride home because the bar was closing soon and she was too drunk to drive. The bar she was at wasn't too far from my house, only about a 10 to 15 minute drive, but the issue was that she lived 30 to 40 minutes on the other side of town. Claire has been extremely nice to me in the past though, and I did owe her a solid, so I grabbed my keys and my concealed carry and left the house. I got to the bar around 2:05, and she was sitting outside on a bench by the doorman. When I pulled up into the parking lot, it was pretty empty since the bar was closed, so I assumed the remaining cars there were all staff that hadn't left yet. I saw that Claire was kind of slumped over as I approached, so I hoped she wasn't passed out. The doorman asked if I was her ride, so I introduced myself and showed my ID as proof. What he said next was kind of concerning, though. He pulled me in and told me that he was going to leave, but had a feeling that Claire had been roofied. Apparently, she had been sitting on the porch drinking all night, and some guy had been hovering around her the whole time. He had assumed it was her boyfriend or something, but she never made any effort to talk to the guy. Instead, she'd just been chatting with other girls around her the entire night. After chugging her last drink, she came up to the door guy and asked if she could sit with him while she waited for me. She said she felt really dizzy and sick, so the doorman hoped she had just drank too much, but she passed out as soon as she sat down. He didn't see the guy anymore, but decided to stay with Claire just in case. Visibly concerned, I thanked the guy profusely. He even helped me carry Claire out to my car. Midway through the parking lot, she started to come to, kind of like someone waking up after a surgery. That really groggy reaction, not knowing where she was, talking nonsense. I don't remember what she was saying since I was on high alert at that point, but I'm sure it was some funny shit. We got her buckled in, and I thanked the guy again, and he just responded to say he hoped she got home safe. I started driving to her house, hoping that she was only stupid drunk and not actually drugged. I did my best to keep an eye on her while still paying attention to the road through the whole drive. I finally felt some relief when she started snoring, fast asleep. But about halfway to her house, my fuel light came on. Cursing the fuel economy of a sports car, I pulled into the next gas station. It was one of those small gas stations that doesn't have a 24-hour store, so I was extra alert while I was pumping gas, knowing that there weren't any employees around. The gas station was about a block away from the freeway and right at the corner of an intersection. The street itself was pretty dark, only lit by some lonely lampposts at large intervals. I had a bad feeling noticing exactly how abandoned this place was. I drive a Corvette, so the tank is in the rear. I was leaning against the edge of my car, trying to keep aware of my surroundings, when I heard a metallic scraping sound from my left. When I turned, I saw a guy about 15 to 20 feet away, coming around the corner, dragging a long metal pipe on the ground. I immediately sensed the potential danger we're in now. The guy almost looked possessed, not even glancing my way, just staring straight towards the interior of my car. I was on the defensive, but wasn't about to piss this guy off, so I just called out, "Hey, is everything all right?" Without looking at me, he answered back, "You took my girlfriend from me. I'm here to take her back." Finally, he turned to look at me, anger in his eyes. Before he started to come towards me, I yelled, hoping it would get him to back off. I'm a little over 6 feet tall and overall a pretty big guy with a deep voice, so I was desperately hoping I could scare him away before things escalated. "Back the fuck off, turn around, and leave, and no one gets hurt." He kept coming towards me though, clearly unimpressed. Almost automatically, I pulled my handgun from my holster and pointed it towards him. "Back the fuck off and you don't have to die," I yelled louder. I was trying to stay brave, but my voice definitely cracked. No amount of self-defense classes can prepare you for a situation like this. Even though I carried, killing someone was not something I was ready to do. In a panic, this fucker threw his pipe right at me. Thankfully, it whizzes by me, missing me and my car. I dove behind my car for cover, having no idea if he had any other weapons on him. By the time I kneeled up and aimed over the rear of the car, he had already booked it in the opposite direction. I heard his car door slam and tires screech as he launched off the curb and swayed out of the lot. In my own panicked hurry, I pulled the pump out of the car, screwed the cap on, and teared out of there myself. Claire was still passed out in my car, and I was terrified, knowing for sure at this point that she had been drugged, suspecting that the guy would try and follow us home. I must have been too focused on keeping her safe earlier that I didn't even notice him follow us from the bar parking lot. The entire drive back to her place, I was wary of any car that was behind me. I was speeding like a jackass when I got to her neighborhood, and I was careful to circle a few blocks just in case the guy was still on her tail. When I was finally satisfied that we weren't being followed, I pulled up to her house and tried to shake her awake. She was still extremely groggy, but was able to get up, which was relieving because I was starting to worry I'd have to call an ambulance. I grabbed her keys from her bag and walked her inside. At this point, she was starting to regain consciousness and was asking me what had happened and where she was. I reassured her that she was home safe and tried to get her to lie down. She was completely lost looking and started to well up with tears, clinging to me and sobbing. She must have realized that something awful was happening, and it was heartbreaking trying to get her to go lie down and get some sleep. Finally, I got her to lie down and I wrote her a note to let her know I was staying in the next room and that I'd be bringing her to the hospital in the morning before crashing on her couch. The next morning, she was sick as a dog for a long time before I was able to get her to the hospital to get her tested and treated. I still shudder to think what would have happened if I didn't have my gun on me. I know martial arts, but that's not something I was willing to try against a crazy person with a pipe. Claire still doesn't remember much from that night, outside of calling to ask me for a ride home. After this experience, my biggest piece of advice for anyone listening is to either go out with friends you trust or be vigilant if you're by yourself. That night could have ended 1,000 terrible ways if things had happened differently. I went to the movies today to see Deadpool with my stepmom, who's recently been training to become a cop. The night started off normally, and I was excited to watch the movie with my stepmom since I'd seen it once before and absolutely loved it. Towards the end of the movie, though, I noticed an older man who had walked to the top of the theater where we were sitting and randomly just stood in the back. He didn't watch the movie, didn't sit down, didn't do anything except stand there and stare at the people. I figured he must have been looking for someone and didn't think much of it. After a few minutes, he walked back down the stairs towards the entrance of the room and did the same thing. Just looked up at everyone and surveyed the crowd for about 10 minutes before leaving. I definitely found this odd, but just continued watching the movie. After a few more minutes, though, I saw the same old man walk in, only this time he walked very slowly across the theater. Again, not facing the screen, just looking at all the people in their seats. At this point, my stepmom turned to me and whispered, "Grab your things and head to the lobby." I was definitely freaked out by her reaction and did exactly what she said. On my way to the lobby, I stopped by the bathroom to go pee, and when I came out, there were 4 employees standing outside the theater talking with my stepmom. She was explaining the man's behavior, claiming it was the type of thing someone would do while planning to shoot up a crowd, scanning the room and everyone in it. The employees took control of the situation and decided to watch the man for a bit before taking any action. 2 of them went into the theater, and after about 5 minutes, they came back out and explained how suspicious the man was acting to their coworkers. We decided to completely leave the building just to be safe. Once we got home, my stepmom called one of her friends who worked at the local police station and talked to them about what we saw earlier. They ended up confirming that a middle-aged man had been arrested at the theater, and he had a loaded weapon on him the entire time. This story happened in 2012 after my best friend Hannah convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. After a long time of searching, she had found her dream car and was planning on traveling 900 kilometers to the northern part of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand purple two-door Suzuki Vitara, and I had to admit, I didn't share her obsession with it, but being her best friend, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I had always had each other's backs. We shared a love for adventure and had traveled the world together. At the time, we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip to Asia, so the idea of a road trip up north wasn't too daunting, even if I didn't care for the car. The man who was selling the car agreed to meet us at a small airport in Umeå. We arrived shortly before lunchtime, and it had started to snow heavily. The first snow of the season, no less. The parking lot was empty, and when I saw the man standing outside of the Suzuki, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter, but a lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle full of hunting and fishing, so this particular detail wasn't all that strange. There was just something about him that made me uneasy. Still, he was quite nice, smiling and waving to us and shaking hands with us before walking us around the car to point out any tiny flaws. He showed us the work he had done to the car and handed us the paperwork detailing the recent engine repairs. He definitely made the impression that he wasn't trying to hide anything. On the contrary, he made quite a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snow was starting to intensify though, and we were getting cold. He opened the car door for us and said, "Hey, I got the paperwork back at home. Let's close the deal over some coffee." Against all my instincts, I climbed into the car after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. Realistically, I had no reason to feel threatened by this man. He had been nothing but pleasant to us, but I couldn't stop the alarm bells from going off inside my head. I can't tell what was making me feel that way, but there must have been some subtle signs that I wasn't immediately aware of, something that my subconscious tuned into. The man was constantly talking throughout the drive, which was funny. People from north of Scandinavia are famous for never speaking a word more than absolutely necessary. He showed us the stereo, told us all the subtle features of the car, and even told us stories about all the places we drove past, all the wildlife and nature. There wasn't a silent moment. After we were driving for about 20 minutes, I noticed that we were not at all moving towards civilization though, and instead, we were going further and further into the wilderness. That's when it hit me. We were in the back of a two-door car, heading into an unknown territory, and no one knew exactly where we were. I looked over at Hannah and saw that she was just happily listening to the man tell stories and didn't look worried at all. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no nearby houses, apart from a small cabin we had driven past a few hundred meters down the road, but honestly, it had looked empty. We followed the man inside, who was still talking nonstop, which he continued until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking questions about the car, but I could sense a new undertone in her voice, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she, too, had started to feel that something wasn't right here. "I'll go put the kettle on," he said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair and smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely and made my way down the hall. I just needed a break from the interaction. As I was washing my hands, I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror. Something was hidden behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled-up plastic folder, and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. It was full of violent pictures from porn that looked like they had been cut out of magazines. They were all glued to paper, surrounded by cut-out pieces of handwritten text that had been spliced together to make a horrifying story. A story about a woman who was lured into a car she was trying to buy, which quickly turned into a chilling murder story. When Hannah and I traveled together, we had a code word for whenever we felt like it was time to get out of a situation. We had never had to use it before. It was mostly a joke at this point, but if there was ever a time to use it, it was now. I walked out of the bathroom and immediately looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes, we forgot to buy potatoes, and that's too bad because good God do we need some." The look on my face must have indicated how serious I was, so she quickly responded, "Oh, should we go get some as soon as possible?" Trying to keep things calm, we casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, and Hannah asked if we could take a look at the cam belt on the car. He mumbled something about how it was in good shape, but still handed over the keys. As soon as we got into the car, pretending everything was fine, we immediately sped off as fast as the weather would allow, rushing towards the airport. Our original plan was to drive the car home, so we didn't have any plane tickets, but instead we left the car at the airport and got the first train home. Luckily, he didn't follow us, as far as we could tell, but we didn't want to linger at the airport any longer than necessary. We were slightly worried that he would report the car stolen, but we didn't want to take any chances with our safety. Once we boarded the train and calmed down a bit, Hannah asked me what made me use the code word, so I finally opened up to her about what I had found in the bathroom. I guess there's a chance it could have just been a fantasy or some kind of sick game. Maybe he wouldn't have done anything to us. But in that moment in the bathroom, I was completely convinced that I would die if we didn't get out.